90 miles. That is roughly how far a Russian army can sustain a fighting force beyond the end of a rail line before its truck fleet stops meeting the requirement. The figure belongs to Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vershinin, writing in War on the Rocks. The Modern War Institute at West Point puts the ceiling a little higher, around 100 miles. Either way, it is a hard edge, and every Russian operation in southern Ukraine hangs off it. In the spring of 2026, that edge failed on a single road. Not because Ukraine cut it in two, because of what Russia did to defend it. So how does a highway guarded by an entire army become unusable while that army is still guarding it? The answer is not a weapon. It is a circuit, and the moment it closed, every correction Russian commanders made pushed the road further toward the state it never came back from. The road is the R280, the corridor Russia calls Novorossiya, roughly 430 miles of asphalt from Rostov-on-Don through Mariupol, Berdyansk and Melitopol and down into Crimea by Aklides mapping. On Ukrainian maps, the same axis carries two numbers, the M14 or E58 from the border through Mariupol to Melitopol, and the M18 or E105 from Melitopol south to Simferopol. They meet in Melitopol, which is why Melitopol is a logistics hub and not just a city. And it only became the artery in October of 2022. After the attack on the Kerch bridge, hazardous cargo, fuel above all, was barred from crossing it. Everything flammable that Crimea needed came by road after that. Soviet supply practice, which the Russian army inherited nearly intact, placed the army's base 40 to 55 miles behind the front and fed it by rail. The supply vehicle's daily range was about 95 miles, one round trip out and back in a day. That figure comes from the Journal of Slavic Military Studies, and the entire system was built on it. Break the round trip and the army does not simply slow down, it starts subtracting from what it can fire. A single rocket artillery salvo by a Russian combined arms army takes between 56 and 90 trucks to replace, roughly half the dry cargo fleet of an MTO brigade, the material technical support formation that keeps that army supplied. Vershinin's number again, reported by Forbes. That is one salvo on one day, with the depot where it should be. Move the depot 60 miles further back, and the same trucks cover the distance twice with nothing left over. Cutting a supply road is one of the oldest failures in modern war, and many of the men watching this lived through the biggest attempt. Operation Commando Hunt ran from the 15th of November 1968 to the 29th of March 1972, 7 phases against the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Roughly 3 million tons of bombs fell on Laos, about 3 times the total dropped on North Vietnam. When Rolling Thunder ended, sorties over the trail jumped from 4,700 in October of 1968 to 12,800 the month after. The trail never closed. The North kept it open and, in 1972, pushed the Easter Offensive down it. And the accounting was generous. Commando Hunt 5 alone claimed more than 16,200 trucks destroyed, above what intelligence believed were on the trail at all. Campaign totals in an interdiction war are claims before they are facts. Millions of tons of ordnance, 4 years, and the road stayed open. What changed by 2026 was the price per shot. Ukraine's mid-range strike drones fly between 30 and 185 miles, and they work the belt from 12 to 185 miles behind the line of contact, according to CNN and The Insider. Open-source researchers at Toshny count at least 14 types in service. The FP2 and the Behemoth are among them. The Behemoth crosses at 110 miles an hour with a 155-pound warhead. The Hornet entered service in the spring of 2026, built by Swiftbeat LLC, formerly Perennial Autonomy, a company founded by former Google chief executive Eric Schmidt. Closer in, the tool is the fiber-optic FPV, a first-person view quadcopter that trails a spool of glass behind it instead of using a radio link. It cannot be jammed because there is nothing to jam, and it emits nothing for a direction finder to hear. David Hambling laid that out in Forbes. Spools of 6 to 9 miles are routine, 12 to 19 have been demonstrated, Ukraine has claimed 26, Russian units have displayed reels of 31 to 40, and a firm called Fold says it is working towards 60. The upper end is manufacturer material, the lower end flies every day. The weakness is mundane. The cable breaks, and it breaks often, which is why a $60 module has been added to hand control back to radio when the glass parts, described by Tetiana Chornovol to Militarny in March of 2026. A basic FPV costs a few $100s. The fiber upgrade adds about 60. An interceptor drone runs about 1,000. A Pylum-class mid-range machine, 95 to 125 miles of range, an 11-pound warhead, costs around 5,000. Analysts cited by Scripps News estimate the entire southern campaign at about $113 million. Russia has never published a replacement value for a military fuel tanker, and the second-hand market, $6,000 to $22,000, is not the same number. But the direction of the trade is not in doubt. $5,000 of airframe removes a tanker and the diesel inside it, and the diesel is the part that cannot be reordered before the next drone arrives. Since the beginning of May 2026, Clément Molin, the GeoConfirm network and CNN's own open-source team have geolocated roughly 150 strikes on Russian fuel trucks and logistics vehicles, and they treat that as an undercount. Tochny's count of geolocated strikes on logistics vehicles went from 1 in January to 130 in May. On the 19th of June, Molin tracked about 30 targets hit in a single day across occupied Crimea and southern Ukraine. Analysts following the campaign reported 483 Russian transport vehicles neutralized on the 29th of May, a single-day record carried by Scripps News, and neutralized is a broader word than destroyed. The geometry matters more than any total. A standard FPV once threatened about 6 miles beyond the line. It now reaches 22. Mid-range aircraft cover 20 to 95 miles and further. The interdicted zone stopped being a line and became a depth, and depth is what an army has to garrison. Russia garrisoned it. Vladimir Saldo, the Russian-installed governor of occupied Kherson, told TASS that the rear roads had become dangerous and that mobile firing teams and mobile air defense units had been pushed out along the highway. NBC reported the same. The Ukrainian partisan movement, Atesh, an interested source, described columns of machine gun-armed pickups thickening on the R280 near Chonhar and the North Crimean Canal crossings. Then, Moscow committed its best drone units to the road. The elite Rubicon Formation and the newly raised 50th Unmanned Systems Brigade were given the mission of defending rear logistics routes and infrastructure. Rob Lee's assessment via Forbes. Ivan Kirichevsky of Defense Express says the 50th answers directly to the General Staff. Rubicon's own center claimed a 54% year-on-year rise in multi-rotor kills in June, which is a Russian claim about Russian performance. But there was a problem with the tool they brought. Electronic warfare is the backbone of Russian counter-drone work, and a fiber-optic drone carries its signal down a physical thread. There is no emission to find and no link to break. RUSI's assessment of the mobile counter-drone groups working the Novorossiya highway is that they do not appear particularly effective. And every mile of added strike depth widens the ground Russia has to cover. Electronic warfare, anti-drone netting over the roadway, observation posts, interceptor crews, mobile air defense. The Insider's analysts describe that as a growing drain. The Ukrainian analyst Dmytro Zluktenko told the Kyiv Post that defending an area that size would consume significant resources, an interested party. The more useful voice is Russian. The mill blogger Voeni Osvedomitel lists what the Axis now demands: netting, secured overnight halts, firing teams, and the transfer of air defense systems that are, in his words, already needed everywhere else. Nobody has published what those protection units burn in a day: the diesel, the generator hours, the ammunition. What is documented is where they sit and what they run on. They sit on the R280. They run on fuel that arrives by the R280. That closed circuit only becomes visible in the way the traffic changed shape. It changed 3 times. First, it stopped. Russian commanders banned convoy movement in some areas, according to Dmytro Putiata, a former captain of Ukraine's 20th K2 Brigade, speaking to NVWA, a Ukrainian account of Russian orders. Pro-Russian authorities in Luhansk went further and announced traffic stoppages on 2 highways coming out of Belgorod and Rostov-on-Don, reported by CNN, an occupation administration closing its own supply roads. Second, it moved under escort. Logistics columns required mobile fire support groups to travel with them, Putiata again, and corroborated from the Russian side by Saldo's own description of firing teams on the highway. Every escort is another vehicle, drawing from the same tank farm as the truck it protects. Third, it moved back. Depots went rearward. some beyond 60 miles from the front in Putyata's account, and mid-range strikes pushed some Russian units to cut diesel use by as much as 20% while pulling supply and command sites further back, what he told the Kyiv Independent in June. And it got worse from there, because distance is charged by the gallon. Detours around interdicted sections stretch the logistical shoulder by 1.5 to 2 times. A 95-mile run becomes 140 to 185. Each truck burns 18 to 40 extra gallons for the distance alone. A 2 to 3 hour trip becomes 4 to 6. Figures from Oboronka via Ukrainian Week. Danilo Boroda-Novitsky, Deputy Chief of Staff of Ukraine's 3rd Army Corps, reduced the campaign to a sentence. Any system, even a mediocre one, beats a wonder weapon if it is applied consistently. The result showed up where road logistics always show up first, at the pump. Crimea moved to fuel rationing, with queues at stations in Saki on the 1st of June, documented by CNN, NBC, and AKLD. Satellite imagery over the Chonhar pontoon crossing showed long lines of trucks after the bridge there was damaged, with traffic into Crimea nearly stopped. Saldo compared the threat to the siege of Leningrad, which is framing built for a domestic audience, and still an admission of difficulty, not of defeat. Russian mill bloggers, 2 major among them, complained about how slowly the Defense Ministry responded. On the 1st of July, Ukraine's Minister Mikhailo Fedorov called it a logistics shutdown. A Russian truck fleet is good for about 90 miles past the railhead. Pushing the depots 60 miles back consumes most of that margin before a single shell moves. The units protecting the road sit on the road and run on the fuel the road carries. Interdicting it costs $5,000 a shot. Every detour multiplies the distance and the burn, and every escort adds a vehicle to feed. A defensive system that consumes the resource it is defending has no flaw. That is the real reason the Southern Highway stopped working. Not a better army, an equation. None of this is severance. The Ukrainian Review argued in mid-June that the picture is pressure and attrition rather than collapse, and that the links to Crimea were never fully cut. ACLED's version is sober. Traffic that is slower, more expensive and less predictable, depending on how well Russia adapts. And Russia is adapting. Pipelines from Rostov through Donetsk to Berdyansk, a Riga railway, a Mariupol bypass, the Azov Ring project, none of it before the end of 2028. Real Clear Defense adds that Russian logistics fail from personnel problems and corruption too, not only from interdiction. The lesson travels west. Task and purpose put it plainly for an American audience. Convoys and big fixed bases are sitting ducks in a drone war, and the US has its own adapting to do. Russia is still trying to hold a road with an army that the road has to feed. The next test of that arithmetic is already named the Arabat Spit, the last land route into Crimea.